Welcome back, MTG Joe here. We are going to do kind of a standalone deck tech. If you haven't heard, Meathook Massacre has been banned in Standard. It is banned as of Monday, October 10th. However, will only go into effect on MTG Arena on the 13th. Kind of annoying because the Mythic Invitational Qualifier weekend, for those who qualified, myself included, is Saturday. So they're going to put the fix in Thursday afternoon and basically give us folks a day to try out new Standard. So I was planning on playing Mono Black, which happened to be a Meathook Massacre deck. And now I have to kind of rebuild and kind of rethink how I'm going to approach this. So I thought what I can do is I can share how I'm going to be rebuilding Mono Black for best of 3 Standard. And honestly, this is pretty much how I would run it for best of 1 as well. Kind of go over my thoughts and explain the sideboard cards and how I'm approaching. The one thing we are going to expect is the Meathook Massacre is only 3 cards in my 75. But what the Meathook Massacre was an overarching format kind of constraint in terms of how you build your deck. A lot of token decks, a lot of go-wide decks. Aggro wasn't as prominent because of the Meathook Massacre. If you look at like Wedding Announcement, while it still gets played, wasn't as format defining. Mono white aggro, mono red aggro, some of the Gruul decks. The life gain from the Meathook Massacre often was a way to kind of drain them out. It also insulated your life total, got you a little bit higher, allowed you to play cards like, for example, Soul Transfer, which is now sideboarded as an example, which got you extra value kind of playing with there. I was also playing Roadside Reliquary, which was a land that drew us cards, another card that now no longer is in the deck because of the Meathook Massacre. So when I built this, I'm approaching in the standpoint of I'm expecting more go-wide strategies, more aggressive decks potentially, a more uptick in like Wandering Emperors, Mono White, maybe the Invoke decks. So that's kind of a strategy there. A lot of still, like Anvil's not going to be as the same in terms of drain, but you could still see some copies there. So there's a couple different things that might be coming down the pipeline and how we want to kind of combat it. So I'll kind of go over what I've changed. So I had the meat hooks in there before. I cut them. I cut down, like I said, the Soul Transfer from the main. This is basically now just 3 mana, sorcery speed, exile target creature or planeswalker. We don't get often the extra value. The exile is still relevant. That's why I'm playing one on the side. If I'm running into Sanctuary Warden, things with shield counters, stuff like that. But I'm opting to swap it for a Hero's Downfall in the main just to have access to instant speed removal. This plays better with stuff like Infernal Grasp, Cut Down, which I've just upped these numbers and played March of the Wretched Sorrow. I was running a Junji in the main for my best of 1 version. I moved that to the sideboard. I'm also just on 2 Lilianas. We are a grindy deck, but against kind of the creature-based decks, it's not as good, especially if we anticipate more go-wide. The minus Edict effect is not as good. I'm running 2 Bankbuster, and I'm pairing it with Mech Hanger. So in the sideboard, which we'll get to, I have the full set of Bankbusters we could bring in, as well as in Licensors. This is a 3 mana, 4 mana with really this, that you could animate any vehicle. So in the grindy matchups where you're eating away at your opponent's hands, everybody's trading resources, there's no creatures on board except the vehicle, you can animate it like that. Even after like an Invoke Despair or something like that, you can attack in with the Bankbuster. Still think this is one of the best top-end cards you can play. Smooth mana base as well. We're really just playing 1 colorless. I don't like Field of Ruin in this format because other than domain decks, but even domain decks will probably play some basics because they're probably going to be playing Herd Migration. Esper sometimes doesn't play basics, but you're not cutting them off. It's kind of just a tempo neutral play. You can maybe sometimes take them off a land, but more often than not, it's not going to be worth it to have a worse mana base. I want consistent mana when we're kind of playing through this deck, and I'd rather get utility. I'd even rather play Roadside Reliquary, even though you'll only have potentially an artifact in this deck. But we have a removal suite. I still like the Evolved Sleeper. I want as many things as possible that if we do go through our hand, Liliana, stuff like that, we can plus and sink our mana into it. So we have Evolved Sleeper, draws us cards. Tenacious Underdog draws us cards. Sorin can give us cards at the cost of life. Bankbuster draws us cards. Invoke draws us cards, potentially. So really just, we're 1 for 1-ing a lot now, but you don't have the meat hook to kind of catch up, but we have ways to refill our hand. I like Sheoldred, Sorin, 3-2 mix as your 4 drops. And then that's kind of the main board of the deck. So we can go aggressive slants, 1, 2, 3, 4, we can be more controlling if needed, and then we can shift our game plan accordingly. In terms of the sideboard, so I'm playing 2 Duress. Hate when it shows like that. One sec. All right, that's all right. The 2 Unlicensed Hearse, they still haven't fixed this stupid format, even though we don't have lesson boards. So 2 Unlicensed Hearse for the graveyard decks. I am expecting more of the Invoke Justice decks, even in grindier matchups. Anything that's trying to take advantage of the graveyard. If we run into Jund trying to bring back Titan, anything like that, we want the Hearse in there. It's also just good in terms of the grindy games to have another vehicle that can be crewed fairly cheaply. We don't have a sweeper in the Meathook Massacre, but we have Malicious Malfunction. I was deciding between this and Path to Peril. Path to Peril really just being cast for 3 mana to deal with creatures 2 CMC or less. This does -2/2. So Path to Peril is better against Meathook once the emblem goes off, or if they have multiples, or if there's like Rafine counters or stuff like that. But this can scale up and hit 3 drops as well. So a Flip Fable, the Mirror Breaker, the Exile is also relevant. It's a little annoying at times that it could potentially hit our Tenacious Underdog, but it hits our opponents as well. So there could be some validity there. I want to try this out first, but we might be switching back to Path to Peril. If we do go Path to Peril, what I would do is switch the mana base to have 4 of the dual lands, the slow lands, the black-white, and then maybe some of the pain lands as well. Get some utility out of that. We have the Soul Transfer. This is going to be in the matchups where I want the Exile. If opponent has an AO or Sanctuary Warden, really the bigger white decks, I'm thinking I want this here. Junji is very good in any of the black-based mirrors. None of the black removal other than Soul Transfer is Exile-based. So Junji will often replace itself by bringing back one of your best threats in the graveyard. In matchups where we're kind of grinding and stuff like that, if I want to attack their hand, specifically Wandering Emperor style decks, I feel like we're going to see an uptick on that. A couple copies of Duress, but I went 2 Duress in the 3rd copy of Liliana for those grindier matchups. Parasitic Grasp, there's a lot of incidental humans in the format, but even just against the aggressive decks, 3 mana, gain 3. Like, it's basically Lightning Helix. That could potentially cost 2 mana for you if it is a human you're targeting. So 2 copies of that. The other Bankbuster, a Liliana for the grindier decks where you want to hit their hands, or a singular threat. So some of like the more Invoke decks, and then Sorin for the grindier matchups where we want just more card advantage. Even Sorin sometimes just being 4 mana, make 2 vampires with lifelink could help in some of the more aggressive decks. So it's kind of my thoughts on where I'm at. A couple cards that I considered was Dreadfuge. So playing some of these in the main board. Basically it's or even like as an adjacent Duress style effect. Some of the decks are playing 2 Duress main, but it would also hit creatures early. So you can take your opponent's turn 1 or 2 creature, but it makes it worse against something like Fable, the Mirror Breaker, Wedding Announcement, Wandering Emperor, because you have to pay 4 mana. So I think largely I would rather Duress. There's also the option of Concealing Curtains. It helps against the more aggressive starts of your opponent and then can be transformed and be a creature. This also kind of insulates you against the Liliana and gives you some information on the hand. This is another card that'd be interesting to try out in some numbers. And I think, like I said, Path to Peril was the other sweeper I was looking at. We have the Infernal Grass, so I think the removal package is fine. And then it's really just what you want in your top end. You can go maybe more aggressive if you want in just a creature-based deck with like Shakedown Heavy, stuff like that. But I think the mid-range, like just still playing Invoke Despair, tends to be one of the better cards of the format and lets you just kind of go over the top. I think there might be some warrant for the Hero's Downfall. It's just like the difference between Exile and just the removal. Just a quick scan, like you can't take advantage of the Shadow's Prophecy. Like I said, Path to Peril would be the other sweeper I'd consider trying in the sideboard. All the other removal is really going to be 4 mana, which is too expensive. You can't take advantage of Drag to the Bottom as a sweeper without reconfiguring your mana base too much and playing a bunch of slow lands, which we don't want because we're still a 1-2-3-4 curve out style deck. Henrika could be a consideration, but when you are facing like Sheoldred gains you the life and is just better, and Sorin's a card advantage, and this would require you at times in more of a sack fodder style deck. And that's pretty much it. Like I said, the Junjis are very good in the side against the Mirror or some of the more grindy based decks, and that would largely... the only other card that you see sometimes in the sideboard is a Pithing Needle. It can be named like Fable, Reflections of the Kiki, Wandering Emperor. That would be something I would consider in the sideboard. If it is, I don't love Duress because there's not a dedicated like blue-white control deck or just big mana like tap out on your turn. Duress is pretty good against the mono blue deck, but it's not really prevalent in best of 3. The Haughty Division deck, it's more of a best of 1 deck. I might, in the end, cut the Duresses, play a Pithing Needle, because if you're just looking at what's available in the enchantments or the artifact slot, you do have Pithing Needle right here, so you can name some stuff. Like Wandering Emperor exiles pretty much all their creatures in attack. I expect to see more of that. Fable, like Reflections of Kiki, you can name that and kind of stop them there. So you get some value there. We're already playing the vehicles, so we're getting that advantage. So I don't really think there's much beyond that. Like, if this was a playable card, like the concept of a colorless Planeswalker would also fit in nicely. Like if Karn Scion of Urza was here, I'd try out that. The other thing is you might want to, depending on how slow the format is, like I said, I'm anticipating it being faster. I wouldn't be against playing a Celestis in potentially like the Hero's Downfall slot. Celestis helps us go turn 4 Invoke Despair. Also helps us if we're missing mana drops. Late game, you can go day-night to draw and like loot through your deck. So that's another card I would consider as we play some games. The unfortunate thing is we won't have much time to test against non-Meathook decks. Depending on the ladder, you can't really pick and choose what you're going against. But that's pretty much where I'd be at. Let me know what you think in the comments, if you would approach it any different, if I'm missing any cards. And if you are playing in the MIQ this weekend, what are you thinking about bringing? And let me know. If you have cool lists, share. Pretty open. I was going to play this because I played a lot in Best of 1 and I'm familiar with these types of archetypes. But last minute pivot thanks to Wizards. In any case, thanks for watching. Hope you have a great one and stay safe out there.